Take your hands off him. Right now. The voice came from the top of the staircase, quiet and without heat, and every person in the great hall of the Vale House went still, as if the air had turned to glass. Verena Locke had been cleaning that house for 6 days when she frightened the one child in the city no one was permitted to frighten. One moment she was crossing the marble floor with a tray of polished silver held against her hip. The next, her heel caught the edge of a rug that should not have been there, and the tray left her hands. It struck the floor with a sound like a bell being broken, and the crash rolled up the tall walls and came back down twice as loud. The boy had been sitting alone by the cold fireplace as he always was. He was small for 7, dark-haired, and so quiet that most of the staff had stopped noticing him at all. At the sound, he flinched as though someone had struck him. His eyes went wide and white at the edges. His hands rose to cover his ears, and his mouth opened, and no sound came out of it, which was somehow worse than a scream. Verena knew that look. She had worn it herself. She was on her knees among the scattered forks before she had decided to move, and she was not thinking about the tray or the noise or the 12 faces that had turned toward her from across the hall. She was thinking only about the child who had folded himself smaller, the way a person folds when the whole world has become too loud to survive. She did not touch him at first. She stopped an arm's length away and lowered herself so that she was smaller than he was. Then, very softly, she began to hum. It was a plain thing, 4 notes that fell and rose and fell again, the kind of tune a person hums without knowing where they learned it. She kept it under her breath, barely louder than breathing, and she did not look directly at the boy. She looked at the floor between them and hummed as though she had all the time in the world and nowhere else she would rather be. The boy's shoulders dropped a fraction. His hands came down from his ears. He turned his head and looked at her, really looked, in a way that the staff would later swear they had not seen him do in almost a year. That was the moment the strange cleaner reached out and rested one hand on his small, shaking back. And that was the moment the voice came down from the stairs. Verena froze. She turned her head and saw a man descending without any hurry at all, one hand trailing along the banister, his eyes fixed on her hand where it lay against the child. He was tall and broad through the shoulders and dressed entirely in charcoal, and he moved the way deep water moves, without noise and without waste. She had been in the house almost a week and had seen him only once, from a distance, through a doorway that had closed before she could look twice. She had not needed a second look to know who he was. Everyone in the city knew the name, Corvin Vale. Mothers used it to make children behave. Grown men lowered their voices when they said it, and some would not say it at all. "I said take your hands off him," Corvin repeated. And though he had not raised his voice by a single degree, the housekeeper near the door made a small sound and looked at the floor. "He was frightened," Verena said. Her own voice came out rougher than she wanted, low and cracked at the edges. And she hated it in that moment as she always did, because a voice like hers made people look at her twice, and being looked at twice was the thing she had spent 4 years learning to avoid. She pulled her hand back and pressed it flat against her apron. "I only meant to keep him from hurting himself. You do not touch the boy." Corvin reached the bottom of the stairs. Up close he was worse, or better. She could not decide which. His face was still in a way that most faces never learn to be, and his eyes were the pale gray of ice over a lake, the kind of ice you could not tell was too thin until you were already through it. "You do not speak to him. You do not go near him. Whatever you were told when you were hired, you were not told that." Behind him, a woman had appeared in the archway, and she was laughing softly, the way a person laughs when someone else's disaster has arrived precisely on schedule. She was beautiful in an arranged and expensive way, pale green silk and pale gold hair, and she held a small cup of coffee as though the scene had been staged for her enjoyment. Verena had seen her twice before. Celestine Roche came to the house often, and she came the way weather comes, expecting the whole household to adjust itself around her. The new one, Celestine said to no one and to everyone. 6 days. I did wonder how long it would take her to break something that mattered. She tilted her head at Verena, and her smile did not touch her eyes. You should keep this one in the laundry, Corvin, where the only thing she can ruin is the linen. A few of the staff looked down. Verena felt heat climb her throat and reach the edge of the scarf she wore looped high and close, the gray scarf that never came off, not in summer, not indoors, not for anyone. Under it, her skin went cold in the way it always did when a room turned toward her, and a voice she had spent 4 years trying to bury spoke up from somewhere behind her ribs, patient and reasonable and cruel. You always do this. You take a simple thing and you turn it into wreckage. People have to clean up after you. Who would keep you looking like that, dropping everything you touch? The voice belonged to a man named Merrick, who was 2 cities and 1 divorce away, and still, somehow, standing at her shoulder whenever a room went quiet. She was reaching to gather the fallen silver, to make herself small and disappear into whatever wing would take her, when she noticed that the boy had not looked away from her. He had stopped shaking. He was watching her with a steadiness that did not match the rest of the room. And when Corvin took 1 step toward him, murmuring the boy's name, telling him gently that it was over, that he could come now, and the child did something that made the housekeeper gasp. He reached out and closed 1 small hand around Verena's sleeve. The hall went completely silent. Corvin stopped. For the first time since he had come down the stairs, something moved across his face that was not control. He looked at the boy's hand on the cleaner's sleeve, and then he looked at the cleaner, and Verena watched him try to make the 2 things fit together, and fail. "Ren does not do that," said a voice from the archway, and a man stepped forward whom Verena had not seen arrive, older, neat, with the careful gentleness of someone whose whole profession was other people's damage. This was Dr. Soren Halliday, though she did not yet know his name. "Mr. Vale, in 14 months I have not seen him reach for anyone, not for you, not for his grandmother, not once." He crouched slowly, studying the child and the cleaner together, the way another man might study a lock that had opened without a key. "What did you do?" "Nothing," Verena said. "I dropped a tray." "You hummed to him. Anyone would have." "No," said Halliday quietly. "They would not. They have not." Verena did not know what to say to that, so she said the only thing she was sure of. She turned toward Corvin and she made herself hold his pale gray eyes even though every instinct she owned was telling her to look at the floor and vanish. "He is not fragile because he is broken," she said. "He is frightened because everyone in this house holds their breath around him, and a child can hear that. You have all decided he is made of glass, so he lives like glass, waiting to be dropped." She swallowed. Her rough voice scraped in her throat. The tray did not frighten him half as much as the silence that came after it. He is used to the silence. He has learned that the silence is what comes right before something worse. For a long moment, no one in the great hall breathed. Celestine's cup paused halfway to her mouth. Halliday was staring at Verena as though she had spoken in a language he had spent his career trying to learn. Corvin Vale looked at the small hand still gripping the cleaner's sleeve. He looked at the child's face, which was turned up toward this stranger with an expression he had not seen on it since the night the boy's parents did not come home. And something in the man's terrible stillness cracked, just slightly. Just enough for Verena to see that under the ice there was a great deal of water, and all of it was cold and deep and moving. "You have been here 6 days," Corvin said. "Yes." "And you believe you understand him better than the doctors I have paid for a year?" "No," Verena said. "I believe I am not afraid of him. That is not the same thing. It is more useful." The corner of the woman in green silk twisted. "Corvin, surely you are not going to stand here and let a maid who cannot carry a tray across a floor lecture you about the boy." Corvin did not look at Celestine. He was still watching the child's hand on the sleeve, and Verena had the sudden sense that this man made very few decisions in front of other people, and that she was about to watch him make one. "Everyone out," he said. They went. Celestine went last and slowest, and she looked back at Verena from the archway with an expression that promised the matter was not finished. The housekeeper gathered two of the younger girls with a glance. Halliday rose, hesitated, and then he too stepped back toward the door, though he lingered at the threshold the way a man lingers when he has just watched something he cannot explain. When the hall was empty except for the three of them, Corvin Vale lowered himself into a crouch several feet from the boy, careful and slow, and Verena understood that he was making himself smaller too, in his own way, though it clearly cost him something to do it in front of a stranger. "Ren," he said. The name came out differently than everything else he had said. There was no command in it. "It is all right. She can stay for a moment." The boy did not let go of her sleeve. "He will not talk," Corvin said. And it was not to Verena and not to the boy, but to the cold air of the room. "He has not spoken a single word in 14 months. I have brought people from 3 countries. I have built a wing of this house for the quiet he needs. And in 6 days, a woman who cannot cross a floor makes him reach out of himself for the first time since." He stopped. He did not finish the sentence. Verena noticed that he did not seem able to. "I did not make him do anything," she said gently. "You do not coax a frightened thing into the open by chasing it. You make the open safe, and then you wait. And you let it come to you when it is ready. That is all I did. I sat where it was safe, and I waited." Corvin turned his pale eyes on her fully then, and for the first time he seemed to see her, and not the accident, not the broken silver, not the scarf. "Where did you learn that?" She thought of a hospital room. She thought of the months she had spent learning to speak again through a throat the fire had rebuilt into something that was not hers. She thought of the volunteers who had sat with her and not chased her, and the ones who had, and how she had learned the difference from the inside. "From being the frightened thing," she said. He was quiet for a while. Then he stood, and the household's dangerous man was back in his shoulders and his voice, and only his eyes had not entirely returned. "You will keep your position here," he said. "You will continue your work, but each afternoon, for 1 hour, you will sit with the boy. You will not push him. You will not touch him unless he touches you first. If I hear that you have frightened him or used him, or spoken a word of this house beyond these walls, you will leave the city that same night. Do you understand what I am? And do you understand that I mean it?" "I understand what everyone says you are," Verena answered. "I have not yet met the man himself." Something flickered at the edge of his mouth that on a warmer face might have become a smile, and then was gone. "Few people have," he said. "Fewer are glad of it." He looked once more at the boy, at the small hand only now beginning to loosen on her sleeve, and then he turned and walked out of the hall without another word, and the temperature of the room seemed to rise the moment he was gone. That night, Verena went home to a single rented room above a shuttered watch shop at the wrong end of the city, and at 11 o'clock, as she did every night, she became someone else. The room was small and cold and entirely hers, which was the only luxury she required. Against one wall stood a narrow desk, and on the desk sat a microphone older than she was, and a board of switches she had learned to work by feel in the dark. The little independent station let her broadcast from home because no one at the station had ever needed to see her, and that arrangement suited her the way water suits a fish. She lit the lamp, low. She wound the gray scarf off at last and let the cold air touch the ruined skin along her jaw and throat, the smooth and shining and pulled tight place the fire had left her, and she breathed out slowly the way she could only breathe when no one could see. At 11 exactly, she leaned toward the microphone, and when she spoke, her cracked and smoke-dark voice was no longer a thing to be hidden. On the air, it was the whole point. "Good evening to everyone still awake out there," she said. "You have found the graveyard hour again, and I am glad of it, because the dark is easier with company. It is only me and you and the long night, so settle in. The lines are open, and if there is something keeping you from sleep, you can tell me. I am not going anywhere. I never am." She called herself Nightjar on the air, after the plain brown bird that no one ever saw and everyone heard, the one that only sang once the sun was down. For 3 hours a night she took calls from the lonely and the sleepless, the truck drivers and the new mothers and the old men who had outlived everyone who once knew their names, and she gave them the one thing she had learned to give better than anyone. She let the silence be safe. She never chased. She waited, and they came to her when they were ready. There was one caller she had come to listen for. He had first called 4 months ago and given no name. He never gave a name. His voice was low and even and careful, a voice used to being obeyed and unused to being heard, and he called almost every night now, always after 2 in the morning, always when the other lines had gone quiet. He did not ask for advice. He did not tell her his troubles. He simply talked to her in the dark, about small things, about a book he was reading twice because he could not hold it in his head the first time, about the sound a house makes when it is too large and too empty, about a child, once, whom he did not name, a child who would not speak and whom he did not know how to reach. She had never asked who he was. That was the covenant of the graveyard hour. No faces, no names, only voices in the dark, which was the only place Verena Locke had ever felt entirely safe. At 2:20, the light on the private line began to glow. She smiled before she pressed it, the private, unguarded smile that no one in the daylight world ever saw, and she leaned into the microphone the way you lean toward a warm fire on a cold night. "There you are," she said softly. "I wondered if the dark would bring you back tonight." There was the small familiar pause, and then the low, even, careful voice came through into her cold and private room, closer than any voice in the daylight had come in 4 years. "I had a strange day," said Corvin Vale. "Something happened in my house that I have not been able to stop thinking about. May I tell you about it?" "Of course," Verena said into the microphone, and she was proud of how steady her cracked voice stayed, because her hands had gone to ice. "Tell me about your strange day. The dark is for exactly this." She listened to Corvin Vale describe the great hall of his house, the boy who had not spoken in 14 months, the tray of silver that had broken across the marble, and the cleaner who had knelt down and hummed until the child reached for her sleeve. He did not say the cleaner's name because he did not know it. He described her only as a woman who could not carry a tray and was not afraid of anything. And he said, in the low, even voice she had come to wait for every night, that he had not stopped thinking about her since. Verena sat in her cold, dark room with the scarf off and the ruined skin of her throat bare to the lamplight, and she understood all at once and completely that the one safe voice in her nights and the one dangerous man in her days were the same person. The man she scrubbed floors for was the man she fell asleep talking to. He had spent 4 months telling the dark his loneliest thoughts, and he had been telling them to the maid he had threatened to throw out of the city that very afternoon. "She sounds," Verena said carefully, "like someone who has been frightened badly and learned from it, and decided to spend what she learned on someone else." The pause on the line was longer than usual. "Yes," Corvin said at last, as though the thought had reached him from an unexpected direction. "That is exactly what she sounds like. How did you know that from a story about a broken tray?" "Because it takes one to know one," said Nightjar, and she changed the subject before her heart could climb any higher into her throat. The afternoon sessions began the next day. They gave her the old music room at the end of the east corridor, a room with a covered piano and long light, and a door that did not lock, and every day at 4 o'clock, Verena set down her cleaning things, washed the polish from her hands, and went to sit with the silent boy. She never began with him. She began with the room. She opened the curtains a little wider than the day before. She sat on the floor rather than a chair, so that she was never taller than he was. She brought small ordinary things and left them within his reach, and did not watch to see whether he took them: a smooth stone, a length of blue ribbon, a paper folded into the shape of a bird. And she hummed. Always the same 4 notes, falling and rising and falling, until the tune belonged to the room the way the light did. Wren carried something with him everywhere, cupped in both hands as if it were a living thing that might escape. It was a small wooden music box, painted once and now worn pale at the corners, with a little brass key in its side that turned and made no sound at all. The housekeeper, Fenna, told her quietly one evening that it had belonged to the boy's mother, that it had played a lullaby once, and that it had stopped the same week she died, and that no one had been able to make it play since, and no one had been permitted to try. Wren wound it 100 times a day. He held the silent box to his ear and waited for a music that never came, and then he wound it again. On the 4th afternoon, Verena stopped humming in the middle of the tune. She let the 4 notes hang unfinished in the air, the way you let a sentence trail when you want someone to finish it for you, and she went on folding her paper birds and said nothing. Wren looked up from the silent music box. He waited. She did not finish the tune. And after a long moment, so quietly that she almost missed it, the boy hummed the last 2 notes himself. It was the first sound he had made in 14 months, and it was barely louder than a breath, and Verena did not react to it at all, because reacting would have chased it back into hiding. She only nodded, as though the two of them had agreed on something, and finished the paper bird and set it down between them. Inside her chest, something was breaking open that she did not have a name for. She did not know that Corvin Vale had been standing at the door. He had come to the music room every afternoon since the first, telling himself it was to watch the boy, standing always just beyond the threshold because the cleaner had said the child needed the doorway kept clear. He had watched her lower herself to the floor day after day and ask the boy for nothing. He had watched her leave gifts she pretended not to give. And now he had watched his brother's son, who had not spoken since the night the world took both his parents, hum 2 notes to a woman he had watched break a tray across the marble. When Verena finally looked up and saw him in the doorway, she braced for the cold voice and the reminder of what he was. Instead, she found Corvin Vale gripping the doorframe with one hand as though it were the only thing keeping him upright, and on the still face that frightened grown men into silence. There was an expression she recognized, because it was the one she wore in her cold room with the scarf off. It was the face of a person who has just been touched, somewhere they had stopped believing could still feel anything. He did not say a word. He turned and walked away down the corridor, and she heard his footsteps stop somewhere out of sight, and stay stopped for a long time. That night, the private line glowed at 2:20, and the low, even voice said, "The boy made a sound today. 2 notes. I have not told anyone, because if I say it aloud in the daylight, it might not be true." A pause. "I wanted to tell someone who would understand what it cost him. You are the only one I could think of." "Then it was worth the telling," said Nightjar. And in her cold room, the maid he did not know he was talking to pressed her ruined hand flat against her mouth and wept, without making a sound, so that the microphone would not hear it. After that, the boy began to choose her. It happened the way water finds the lowest place, without announcement. Wren would not begin his afternoons until she arrived. He would not eat the evening meal Fenna brought unless Verena was the one to set the bowl beside him. When Dr. Halliday came for his weekly visit and tried gently to guide the boy toward the tall chair by the window, Wren crossed the room and sat down against Verena's knee instead, and would not be moved. And the doctor sat back on his heels and laughed softly and said that in 20 years he had never seen anything work the way this was working, and that he did not fully understand it, and that he did not need to. The afternoon it truly broke open. Corvin came to the music room to take the boy to a physician's appointment, and he crouched and held out his hand and said the boy's name in the gentle voice he kept only for him. And Ren looked at his uncle, the man whose name mothers used to frighten children, the man who had built a wing of his house around the child's silence, and the boy shook his head and pressed himself closer to the cleaner's side. The room went very quiet. Verena watched something move through Corvin's face that she had no right to see, and she spoke before the silence could turn into a wound. "He is not choosing against you," she said softly. "He is choosing the place where nothing is expected of him. Give him a little while longer. He will come to you. You cannot call a frightened thing to heal. You can only be somewhere it wants to be." "You said that already," Corvin murmured. "The first day." "It is still true. Some things need saying twice." He looked at her for a long moment, at the gray scarf wound high at her throat, at the face she kept half turned away out of a habit 4 years deep, and something crossed his expression that she could not read and did not trust. "You speak to me," he said slowly, "as though my name does not require a different version of you. Almost no one does that. There is one other. I have never met her." He seemed to hear himself and stopped and stood. "10 more minutes," he said to the boy and to her. And he walked to the window and stood with his back to the room and let the child have his 10 minutes. And Verena understood that she had just watched the most powerful man in the city surrender a small war to a 7-year-old and lose it gladly. He began to stay for the 10 minutes, then for the hour. He would come to take the boy somewhere and end up sitting in the tall chair by the window with a folder of documents he did not read, while the cleaner sat on the floor and hummed and the child wound his silent box. And something in the enormous cold house grew warm in that one long room where the light stayed late. Fenna started bringing 3 cups of tea instead of 1. Corvin never touched his. He removed his watch and set it on the sill, which Fenna said, wide-eyed, she had not seen him do since before his brother died. He did not know why the scarred woman who cleaned his floors settled something in him that had been unsettled for years. He told himself it was gratitude, that she had given him back a piece of the boy. He did not connect the cracked low voice that soothed the child in the daylight to the cracked low voice that talked him towards sleep in the dark. Because a man does not go looking for the woman he loves in the person he pities, and Corvin Vale had been taught by a hard life to keep the parts of himself in separate and guarded rooms. Verena knew. That was the cruelty of it. She sat on the floor of the music room each afternoon, knowing exactly whose loneliness she was holding, and she went home each night and held it again through a microphone, and she could not tell him at either hour, because the thing that made her safe in both rooms was that he could not see her face. Celestine Roche made it her business to be present on the afternoons she could manage it. She would drift into the east corridor in her pale silk and stand in the doorway the boy needed kept clear, and she would watch the cleaner on the floor with an expression of patient distaste, as though observing a stain that had not yet been dealt with. She had not forgiven Verena for surviving the great hall with her position intact. She had forgiven her far less for the 3 cups of tea and the watch on the windowsill. "It is a curious kind of theater," she said one afternoon, loudly enough to carry. "The broken maid and the broken child. I suppose damaged things do recognize one another. Tell me, does he keep you because you are useful, or only because you match the furniture he cannot throw away?" She smiled. "Careful with that box, girl. If you drop it the way you drop everything else, there will be nothing of his mother left at all." Heat rose under the scarf. Verena's hands, which had been perfectly steady for an hour, began to shake, because a room had turned toward her, and Merrick's patient voice had climbed up out of her ribs to explain kindly that she ruined everything she was allowed near. She reached to set down the paper bird and her fingers would not obey her, and she felt the old familiar shame arrive like a tide. Then a small warm weight pressed against her side. Ren had crossed the room. He had put himself between the cleaner and the woman in the doorway, and he was glaring at Celestine Roche with a 7-year-old's whole undivided fury, and he had taken his mother's silent music box and pushed it into Verina's shaking hands, closing her fingers around it with both of his, as if to say that he trusted her with the one thing in the world he trusted no one with, and that the woman in the doorway could say what she liked. Verina's hands went still around the box. The shame went out with the tide it came in on. "He does not match the furniture," she said quietly, looking up at Celestine. "He is the only warm thing in this house, and he just decided who he is safe with. You are welcome to disagree with him. He will not change his mind." Celestine's smile thinned to nothing. She looked past Verina to the doorway behind her and went the color of paper, and Verina turned and found Corvin Vale standing in the corridor, and understood from the woman's face that he had heard all of it. He gave Celestine no glance at all. He looked at the boy's 2 small hands wrapped around the cleaners, holding the music box safe between them, and then he looked at Celestine and said one word, "Leave," in a voice with no heat in it at all, and she left, and she did not come back for a long while. The 2 rituals became the shape of her life. In the daylight she was the maid he did not truly look at, sitting on the floor with his nephew. In the dark, she was the voice he could not do without. Closer to him than any person had come in years. And slowly, across the long nights, the guarded man began to open the last rooms of himself to the dark. "Everyone I know," he told her one night, "met me after my name had already become a thing to be afraid of. They calculate me. Every word I hear has a price attached before it reaches me. Except the boy. And except you. Neither of you ever wanted anything from me that I could give with money." "Tell me about the boy's father," she said, because she had learned that the deepest wounds only come out sideways when you ask about someone else. The pause was so long she thought he had gone. Then, in a voice stripped of all its evenness, he told her. He told her about a younger brother who had wanted no part of the family business, who had gotten out, married a schoolteacher, had a son, and built an ordinary, bright life across the city. He told her how their world had reached across that distance anyway, one night 14 months ago, and taken both his parents and left the boy behind, alone. He told her he had built the child a house of silence because he did not know how to give him anything else, and that every quiet room in it was an apology he did not have the words for. "I keep him safe now," Corvin said. "I keep everyone I care for very safe. It is the only thing I know how to do with love. I make a wall around it and I stand on the wall. A breath. It does not seem to be enough. The boy is behind the safest wall in the city, and he still does not speak." Verina sat in her dark room with tears sliding into the ruined skin of her jaw, and thought, "We are the same. You built walls and I built a scarf. You hide behind your name and I hide behind mine. We are 2 frightened things who learned that being seen is the same as being hurt, and we found each other in the only dark safe enough to speak in. Once," she said before she could stop herself, "there was a fire. I was in it. I came out changed, on the outside, in a way people do not like to look at. And I learned that the world has very little patience for damage it can see. So I found work where no one has to see me, and a place in the dark where a voice is only a voice." She stopped, frightened of how much she had given away. "That is why I understand your boy. The scars people cannot see are the loudest ones." She heard him go still. "Who did that to you?" he said, and there was something new and low in it, something that had teeth. No one who meant to, she said. It was a building that was not supposed to have anyone in it. Old news. A long time ago. She made herself laugh, and the sound scraped. You see, we are alike. You keep people safe and cannot. I keep myself hidden and cannot stop wanting to be found. Then let me find you, Corvin said. The words came out of the dark and landed in the center of her chest. In the long silence that followed, she could hear her own pulse and the faint hum of the old board and the great terrible weight of everything she could never let him know. I mean it, he went on, quiet and certain and, for the first time since she had known his voice, almost pleading. 4 months I have talked to you, and I do not know your name or your face. And it does not matter. It has never once mattered. And I have started to think that you are the only true thing left in a life built entirely out of walls. I want to meet you. One time, wherever you choose. You can keep every secret you have. I only want to sit in the same room as the voice that lets me sleep. Verena Locke looked at her ruined reflection in the dark window, at the scarf lying loose around a throat the fire had remade, and she thought of the man sitting behind the highest walls in the city, waiting in the dark for her answer, the man whose floors she would scrub again in 6 hours, the man who had described a building that was not supposed to have anyone in it, a fire, old news, a long time ago, in the exact tone of a person confessing something he had spent years refusing to name. And the first cold finger of a far worse suspicion touched the back of her neck. I have to take another call, she whispered, and pulled her hand back from the glowing line and sat alone in the dark with her heart going like something trying to break out of a locked room, because she had just understood that the only place she had ever felt safe was about to ask her the one question that would end her, and she was no longer certain the fire that had taken her face had not been lit by the very hands she now fell asleep, trusting. Dr. Soren Halliday began coming twice a week instead of once. He told Corvin it was because the boy was making progress no one had predicted, which was true. And he told himself it was because he had never in his career watched a person do instinctively what he had spent 20 years learning to do imperfectly, which was also true. And he did not tell anyone that he had begun to look forward to the hour in the music room for reasons that had nothing to do with the child. He asked Verena where she had trained. He asked whether she had ever considered the work as a profession. He wrote down her answers in a small notebook and read them back to her as though they were rare and valuable. And once, leaning close to watch how she held her hands still, he rested his own hand briefly against her elbow and said that she had a gift the world had wasted. Wren watched all of this from the floor with the flat, unblinking attention of a small animal deciding whether something is a threat. And the afternoon Halliday sat down on the rug beside Verena, close to see the paper birds from her angle. The boy stood up, crossed the small distance, and wedged his entire body into the space between them, glaring up at the doctor with his mother's music box clutched to his chest. I believe I have been informed of my place, Halliday said mildly, and moved back. And Verena laughed, and did not see the man standing in the corridor. Corvin had seen all of it. He said nothing then. But at 2:20 that morning, the low, even voice reached her in the cold, dark room with an edge she had not heard in it before. There is a man in my house, Corvin said. A good man. Clever, and kind, and useful to someone I love. He has begun to look at a woman the way a man looks when he has decided something. And I find that I cannot stand the sight of it. And I do not entirely understand why, because I have no claim on her, and she has given me no reason to imagine she would want me to. Verena sat very still with the microphone inches from her ruined mouth. And who is she? She asked, though she already knew, though the knowing was a blade going in slowly. A woman who works in my house, he said. She is quiet. She keeps herself hidden, I think out of some old hurt. and half the time she looks as though she expects the room to turn on her. And she is the bravest person I have ever met, and she reached my brother's son when the whole world had given him up, and I have started to arrange my days around 1 hour on the floor of a music room, and I do not know when that happened. A breath. I am telling you this because you are the only person I can say it to. Is that not a strange thing? I am jealous over one woman and confessing it to another, and you are the only one in either case I can bear to be honest with. Verena Locke pressed her scarred hand over her mouth so that he would not hear the sound she made, because the man she loved had just told her he was falling in love with her, and she was two women to him, and he did not know that either of them was the one he had wronged, and somewhere under all of it the dread she had carried since the last call was quietly hardening into certainty. "Tell me something," she said when she could speak. "You said once there was a fire in your past, a building that was not supposed to have anyone in it. I have never asked you for a true thing about yourself. I am asking now." The silence stretched so long she thought the line had died. "Early," he said finally, and his voice had gone somewhere flat and far away. "Before I understood what the work would cost other people. There was a building that belonged to a man who had crossed my family. I gave the order for it to be emptied and burned. It was the kind of thing my family did in those days, and I was young and did not yet question it. I was told it was empty. It was not empty. I learned that afterward. People were hurt who had nothing to do with any of it. People who were only sheltering somewhere out of the cold, and one of them, a young woman, they told me, lived, though she should not have. I have never found out her name. I have never let myself. It is the thing I have done that I cannot build a wall high enough to stand on. When the boy will not speak, I think, this is the cost. This is the interest owed. Why do you ask me this?" Verena looked at the smooth and shining skin of her own throat in the dark glass. The skin a fire had given her in a building that was supposed to be empty, on a night she had gone in out of the cold because she had nowhere else that winter, and she understood that she had at last learned the name of the hand that had made her. "No reason," she whispered. "The dark asks strange questions. Go to sleep. She will still be there in the morning, your brave, quiet woman." She switched off the board before he could answer, and she sat in the dark for a long time, and she did not weep, because some things are past weeping. The gathering was for the boy's grandmother, a small, hard old woman who came from the country twice a year, and Corvin held it in the long gallery with the good light, and the whole careful world of the Vale House came to be seen. Verena was there only to carry trays, her face turned down, and the gray scarf high. She had told herself she would keep to the walls. She had told herself she would not look at him. Celestine Roche had other plans. She had spent weeks watching her place in the house be quietly taken by a maid with a ruined face, and she chose the moment when the gallery was full, and the grandmother was near, and Corvin was watching. "You must meet the help," she said, drawing Verena into the center of the room by the wrist before she could pull away. "She is quite the miracle worker, they say. Show us then. Say something. We have all heard you can barely speak above a whisper. Is that the fire I have heard about? Or only shyness? Go on. Let the family hear the voice that supposedly charmed the child, and we will judge whether it was talent or only pity." The gallery turned toward her. Every face. Merrick's voice rose up out of her ribs, patient and kind, to remind her that this was what happened when she let herself be seen, that she should never have imagined a room like this had room in it for her. Her hands began to shake around the tray. The old shame reached for her, and then, into the silence, a small, clear voice said, "Leave her alone." The tray did not fall because Verena had forgotten she was holding it. Every head in the gallery turned from the maid to the child standing in the doorway. Wren had spoken. Ren, who had not said a word in over a year, who had built his silence like a wall around a wound, stood in the doorway of the long gallery with his mother's music box held against his chest, and he said it again, louder, his small voice cracking on the effort of 14 months of held breath. "Leave her alone. She is mine." He crossed the whole length of the gallery through the parting crowd and put his hand in Verina's, and the grandmother made a sound and pressed her fingers to her mouth, and Dr. Halliday sat down abruptly in a chair as though his legs had failed, and Celestine Roche stood alone in the center of the room she had meant to command, forgotten. And Corvin Vale looked at his brother's son speaking, holding the hand of the woman he could not stop arranging his days around, and the still terrible face that ruled half the city came apart at last, quietly, in front of everyone, into something young and undone. Verena knelt down and did the only thing that mattered, which was to look at the boy and not the room. "I heard you," she told him. "You did that, not me, you." And Ren, having spent his whole store of words, leaned his forehead against hers and was silent again. But it was a different silence now, a full one, the kind that comes after and not before. She found Corvin later on the dark stone terrace, away from the light, both hands flat on the balustrade, looking out at nothing. She had meant to slip away home. She went to him instead, because she could not help it, because the dread and the love had wound themselves so tightly together in her that she could no longer tell where one ended. "He spoke because of you," Corvin said without turning. "He spoke because he was ready, and because someone he loved was in trouble. That is what finally does it. Not safety. Something worth breaking the silence for." She stood beside him at the rail. "You gave him a house without sharp edges. I only gave him a reason to use his voice. Both were needed." He turned to her then in the dark, and the light from the gallery was behind him so that she could not read his face, and he said, low, "Every day I sit on that floor and watch you give my boy back to me one small piece at a time, and I do not have a word for what I feel that is not too large to say to a woman I have no right to." He lifted one hand, slowly, and with the back of his fingers he touched the edge of her jaw above the scarf, the unruined side, the side she let the world see. "You keep yourself so hidden," he murmured. "I wish you knew there was nothing in you the light would not forgive." And Verena, standing in the dark with the man she loved and the man who had burned her, who were the same man and did not know it, made the only reckless choice of her careful life. She turned her face up in the dark where he could not see it clearly, and she kissed him. He went completely still. For a moment his hands stayed at his sides, the way a man's hands stay when he cannot believe a thing is being given to him. Then one came to rest, careful and light, at her waist, and the other rose to her cheek, and he kissed her back, like a man drinking after a long thirst, and she let herself have it. 1 whole minute of the thing she could never keep. "Stay a while," he said against her mouth. And it was not a command, it was the furthest thing from one, and something in the way he said it, low and cracked open and undefended, was so exactly the voice from the dark that her whole body went cold. "I have to go," she said, and pulled back. "Say that again." He had gone still in a new way. "What you just said. Say it again." "I have to go, Corvin. Please." He was staring at her in the dark, and she could see him reaching for something, some connection swimming up toward the surface of his mind, his brows drawn, his lips parting. "Your voice," he said slowly, "when you are not guarding it. I have heard your—" She did not let him finish. She fled the terrace and the gallery and the house, and she ran the whole cold way home with her heart trying to tear itself loose, because he had almost had it, and there was no version of the truth that did not end her. The storm came 4 nights later. It came off the water without warning, the kind of storm that turns a whole city white with light and then black again, and at 11:30 Verena's telephone rang, the ordinary daytime line and not the private one. And it was Fenna, breathless, saying the boy had woken screaming without sound, that he had not done this since the beginning, that the thunder had put him back in the night. His parents died and no one could reach him, not the doctor on the phone, not his uncle, no one. And would she come? Please? For the love of everything, would she come now? She came. She did not think about the scarf or the voice or the terrace or any of it. She came through the rain and the white bursts of light to the great house and up to the boy's room. And she found Corvin Vale on his knees on the floor with his arms around a child who was fighting him like a drowning thing. And the dangerous man's face was wet. And he was saying the boy's name over and over in a voice that had no power left in it at all. "Stop," Verena said from the doorway. "You are frightening him more. You sound like the storm. Get down on the floor, lower than he is, and be still." Corvin looked up at her, and for once in his life he did exactly as he was told. He let go, and he sat back on the floor, lower than the child, and went still. Verena knelt at a distance the boy could see across and did not close. She put one hand flat on the floor, and she began, very softly, to hum the 4 notes, falling and rising and falling. She did not reach for the boy. She did not raise her voice against the thunder. She let the tune be a small safe thing in the middle of the enormous noise, and she waited. The way she had waited on the first day, the way she had told the man beside her a dozen times, "You must wait. You cannot chase a frightened thing into the open, and you can only make the open safe." Thunder broke over the house. Wren flinched but did not run. Verena hummed. And then, because the boy needed more than a hum tonight, because he needed the whole of it, she opened her ruined throat and she sang, low and cracked and warm, the words to the lullaby that a small painted music box had stopped playing the night his mother died. The song the boy's mother had wound for him every night of his short life. The song Verena had learned from Fenna and practiced alone in the dark for exactly this. The boy went still all over. He turned toward the sound. And slowly, on his hands and knees, he crossed the floor and climbed into her lap and pressed his ear to her chest to feel the song coming up through her, and his small body began, at last, to loosen. Verena kept singing, and across the small space, on the floor, in the flick and dark of the lightning, Corvin Vale stopped breathing. Because he knew the voice. He knew it the way you know your own name called across a crowded room. He had fallen asleep to it 4 months of nights. He had confessed his soul to it in the dark. He had wanted, more than he had wanted anything in years, to sit one time in the same room as the woman it belonged to. And here it was, coming out of the scarred and hidden cleaner on the floor of his nephew's room, the maid he pitied and the voice he loved. One woman, one throat. And he had been in the same room with her every single day and never known. "It is you," he said. His voice barely carried over the rain. "Nightjar, it has been you the whole." Lightning filled the room, white and total, and in it, Verena turned toward him, and the gray scarf, loosened in the boy's fighting, slid at last from her throat and her jaw, and Corvin Vale saw her face. He saw the smooth and shining skin the fire had left, the pulled and gleaming line of it running from her jaw down into the collar of her dress, the mark of a burn old and deep and survived. And she watched him see it, and she braced. Every muscle for the thing she had braced for her whole hidden life, the flinch, the look away, the careful arranging of a face that has decided not to show its disgust. That was not what she saw. She watched Corvin Vale look at her scar, and she watched the recognition of the voice and the recognition of the face crash together in him, and she watched him arrive, in one terrible instant, at the third thing, the thing waiting underneath. A young woman, they told me, lived, though she should not have. A building that was not supposed to have anyone in it. She saw the exact moment he understood that the woman he loved and the woman he had burned were the same woman, and that he had been kneeling at her feet for weeks, with no idea he had already taken everything from her once. The man half the city could not name, above a whisper, made a sound she had never heard a person make, low and broken, as though something structural in him had given way, and he did not reach for her. He pulled back from her, hard, pressing himself against the wall, staring at his own hands, and his face was not full of disgust. It was full of horror at himself, but Verena, who had learned to read a flinch across 4 hard years, saw only that the man she loved had looked at her true face and recoiled. The boy slept on in her arms, worn out, safe, humming the last 2 notes of the lullaby against her chest. "Say something," Verena said. Her cracked voice shook. "Whatever it is, say it. I did that to you." He could barely form the words. "The fire, the building. It was mine. I gave the order. I am the reason you—" He stopped. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. "You have been in my house. You have healed my child. You have let me talk to you in the dark night after night. And every night I was talking to the woman whose life I burned down. And I did not even—" His voice failed entirely. "I know," she said quietly. "I have known for a while now. Since the night you told Nightjar about the fire, I put it together before you did." He looked at her with something like terror. "And you came here tonight anyway, into the house of the man who did this to you. Why? Why would you—" "Because a child needed me," she said. "You are not the only thing in the world, Corvin. Your guilt is not the biggest thing in this room. He is." And she looked down at the sleeping boy, and for a moment there was nothing in her voice but tiredness. "I do not know yet what I feel about you. I do not know if there is a version of this that ends any way but badly. But I did not come here for you. Do not make tonight about your reckoning. He earned his sleep. Let him have it." She should have known, even then, what a man like Corvin Vale would do with a guilt that size. She should have known that a man who had told her plainly he knew only one way to love, that he built a wall around it and stood on the wall, would not be able to leave a debt like this alone. She should have known that the very depth of his remorse was about to become the next cage, because Corvin Vale had spent his whole life turning fear into control, and he had just been handed the largest fear of his life. And within 3 days he would try, with everything he had, to fix what he had broken by taking her choices away from her one more time. It began the morning after with a car she had not asked for, waiting each morning to carry her to and from the house. Then a man outside her door, for her protection, he said, because his enemies were not gentle and now they might learn what she was to him. Then the lease on her cold free room quietly bought out from under her, and a suite prepared in the safest wing of the Vale house, her books arranged on shelves, her old microphone carried up and set on a marble table as though a life could be lifted whole across a city and set down unchanged. Then, the money. An account opened in her name with a sum in it that could have bought the street she grew up on. Restitution, he called it. When she found the papers. "The least I owe you. The beginning of what I owe you." She found him in his study with the account papers in her scarred hand, and the old cold dread turned to something harder. "You bought my room," she said. "It was not safe. None of it was safe. If my enemies learn that Nightjar is under my protection, if they learn what happened in that fire and who you are, they will use you to reach me. I could not leave you in a room above a watch shop with a lock a child could break. I have moved you somewhere I can keep you safe. I have made sure you will never have to clean another floor or fear another winter as long as you live. Verena, I am trying to make it right." "You are trying to make it quiet," she said. "You are trying to make the thing you did stop screaming at you. And you have decided the way to do that is to arrange my whole life without asking me a single question, exactly the way you emptied that building without checking who was inside. She watched the words land. She made herself keep going. There was a man before you, my husband. He also kept me very safe. He took my keys so I would not have accidents. He canceled my plans so I would not be overwhelmed. He explained to everyone how fragile I was, until I believed it, until my hands shook before I touched anything. He never once raised his voice. He loved me, he said, and everything he took from me, he took for my own good. She set the papers down on the desk. You watched me sit on a floor for weeks and tell you that you cannot chase a frightened thing into the open. You cannot cage it safe. You watched me wait at a doorway 100 times rather than pull that child where I wanted him. And the moment you were frightened, you did to me the one thing I swore I would never let another person do again. Corvin's face had gone gray. This is not the same. I am trying to protect you. I did this out of love. I know. He said that too. That is the sentence, Corvin. That is the exact sentence. Men who take everything from a woman always take it out of love, and they are always trying to keep her safe. And their reason is always the special one, the urgent one, the one that makes the cage reasonable. Her eyes filled and she let them. I fell in love with a voice in the dark that never once asked me to be smaller. And then I found out the voice belonged to the hand that burned me, and I decided, heaven help me, that I could carry even that, because you had never yet tried to own me. And then you did, within 3 days, the first time you were afraid. Verena. He was on his feet. Do not leave, please. The boy. Ren needs. He heard it the moment it left his mouth. She watched him hear it. She watched the shame of it cross his face, worse than any of the rest. You are right, he said at once, quietly. I should not have said that. That was the worst thing I have ever done, and I have done a great many worse things, and that was still the worst. I taught that boy that being loved would not be used against him, and I just tried to use him against you. Forgive me. Do not forgive me. Only do not go because of him. Go, if you must go, because of me, and let that be the true reason. For a moment, neither of them moved. I am going to take the money out of that account and put it into a service for children like him, she said. Children the world gave up on because their wounds are loud. You do not get to say no. That is not restitution to me. That is what you owe the ones who did not live. She took the cold, free key to a room she no longer had off her ring and set it on the desk beside the papers. And then she took it back, because it opened nothing now, and she almost laughed, and it came out as something else. I am leaving the house, Corvin. I am keeping the radio, because the dark was mine before it was ours, and I am asking you not to follow me, and not to guard me, and not to fix me. And this once, this one time, I am asking you to prove you meant a single word you said to me in the dark by doing the hardest thing your kind of man can do. Nothing. I am asking you to do nothing. Can you? Every instinct in him strained against it. She could see the war of it in his shoulders. The whole architecture of a life built on the belief that safety was a wall you built with your own hands around the people you loved. She watched him take that belief in both hands and, for her, set it down. One driver, to see you safely wherever you choose, he said, and his voice was barely his. And then nothing. My word. One driver, and then nothing. She left the Vale House in the gray morning with a single bag, and behind her, at a high window, a small boy pressed a silent painted music box against the glass and watched the car until it was gone. She rented 2 rooms above a bakery on the far side of the city, and she stopped hiding. That was the thing she had not expected. The thing 4 years and a marriage and a fire had not been able to give her. that leaving the safest house in the city was the thing that finally let her put the scarf away. She wore her hair back. She let the light touch the shining skin of her throat. The baker's children stared for a week, and then forgot to. She took the money she would not keep, and she made it into something. A small service that went to the homes of children who could not be reached. The mute and the raging and the ones the specialists had files on and no answers for. And she sat on their floors and did not chase them. And one by one, slowly, some of them came into the open. She kept the graveyard hour. She sat at the old microphone in a room with the curtains open now, and told the sleepless city that the dark was easier with company. And it was true, and she believed it. And only she knew that there was one voice she listened for every night at 2:20 that never came anymore. Because Corvinvale did nothing exactly as she had asked, and it was the hardest thing he had ever done. And he did it anyway. He did not call the private line. He did not send men to watch her rooms, though he wanted to with a want that kept him awake. He did not buy the bakery. When his people brought him word, unasked, that she was well, that the service was growing, that she had been seen laughing in the market with her face bare to the sun, he told them to stop bringing him word because he had not earned the right to know, and because a report was only a leash made of paper. He learned at last to sit still inside of fear and not reach for the walls. And Wren stopped speaking again. Not all at once. The words came slower and then, not at all. And the music box went everywhere with him wound tight and silent, and he took to sitting at the high window in the afternoons at the hour she used to come, watching the empty east corridor. Corvin did not photograph it. He did not record the boy's grief and send it across the city with a note that said, "Come back, look what you have done," though a lesser and earlier version of himself would have, though it would have worked. He sat with the boy at the window instead, the two of them and the silent box. And one afternoon he said aloud, to the only creature who had ever known him before the name, "I did what I always do. I was given something too good for me and I tried to make it safe and I broke it." She told me exactly what she needed. She told me 100 times, sitting right there on that floor. And the first time I was afraid, I stopped listening. The boy leaned against his side. "I am trying to learn to do nothing. It is the hardest thing anyone has ever asked of me. I think it might be the only apology she would believe." Autumn came. The service Verena built took on 2 more workers. She was, by any measure a careful woman could bear to use, happy, or near enough to it that the difference did not keep her awake. And then, on the first truly cold night of the year, the private line glowed at 2:20, for the first time in 5 months, and when she pressed it with a hand that had gone unsteady for the first time in a long time, it was not Corvin's voice that came through. It was a child's. "It is me," said Wren in the small, clear voice she had heard exactly once, and her whole heart turned over. "Uncle does not know I am on the telephone. Fenna helped me find the number. You are the lady on the radio. I worked it out. Your voice is the same." A pause, and then, with the terrible directness of a 7-year-old, "You went away and I stopped talking again and I do not want to, but I cannot find the reason to. Uncle sits with me and he does not make me. He does not make anyone do anything anymore. He is very sad and very quiet, and he will not tell me why, but I think it is you." Another pause. "The music box still does not play. Will you come and try? Not for him. He said I am not allowed to ask you for him. I am asking for me. Will you come and try the box?" Verena Locke sat in the dark with tears running freely down the ruined side of her face. And she did not try to stop them, and she said, "Yes, I am coming. Do not tell your uncle. I want to see his face when he does nothing." She went the next afternoon, in the daylight, with her scarf in her pocket and knot around her throat, up the long drive of the house she had sworn she would not enter again, and Fenna opened the door with her hand pressed to her mouth and stood aside. And there, in the great hall where a tray of silver had once broken across the marble, Corvin Vale came around the corner and stopped as though he had walked into glass. He looked at her. He looked at her bare face in the full, unforgiving light of the tall windows, the scar and all of it, and he did not flinch, and he did not reach for her, and he did not say a single word about safety or protection or the money or the debt. He stood absolutely still in the middle of his own hall, this man who had commanded her to take her hands off the boy on the first day. This man half the city could not say the name of above a whisper, and he waited, at a distance she could cross or not cross, for her to decide. "He called me," she said. "Wren. He asked me to come and try the box. He was very clear that he was not asking for you." "I know," Corvin said. "He told me he did nothing wrong because he asked for himself. He has learned the rules of this house better than I taught them." His voice was rough. "I did not know he had found your number. I would not have let him use you to reach you. I want you to know that. Whatever else you believe about me, believe that I have not sent you one single word in 5 months because you asked me not to. And it was the only gift I had left that you might want." "I know," she said. "That is why I came." She crossed the hall. She went past him, close enough to feel the stillness it cost him to let her pass unreached, and she went up the stairs to the boy's room. And Corvin followed at the distance of a man who has learned to wait at doorways, and he stopped at the threshold and did not come in. Wren was sitting on the floor with the music box in both hands. When he saw her, he did not run to her. He held the box up, the way he had once pushed it into her shaking hands in front of Celestine Roche, offering her the one thing he trusted no one with, and he said, "It stopped when Mama did. Nobody can fix it. Uncle tried, and he can fix anything. Will you?" Verena sat down on the floor, lower than the boy, the way she always had. She took the small worn box in her scarred hands and turned it over, and she found what a year of frightened, careful people had never let themselves look closely enough to find: a tiny brass lever gummed still with 14 months of a child's anxious winding, the spring wound so tight and so long that it had locked itself past playing. She did not force it. You never force a thing that has been frightened into silence. She worked the lever gently, patiently, a fraction at a time, humming under her breath. 4 notes, falling and rising and falling, and she felt the old spring give up its long-held breath by degrees, and then, all at once, under her fingers, the box began to play. The lullaby filled the room, thin and sweet and slightly out of true. The song a dead woman had wound for her son every night. The song a scarred woman had sung into a storm, and Wren's face broke open into something Corvin had not seen since before the world went dark, and the boy said, "You fixed it." And then he said, "You came back." And then he simply put his arms around her neck and held on. And at the threshold of the room, the most feared man in the city stood and watched the two of them on the floor with the music playing, and he did not move to join them, though every part of him strained toward the warmth, because he had learned at last that some rooms you have to be invited into. Verena looked up at him over the boy's dark head. "You did nothing," she said. 5 months. You actually did it." "You asked me to," he said simply, as though that were reason enough, as though it had not been the hardest thing he had ever done, as though a life did not stand or fall on it. "I have terms," she said. "Name them. Any of them. All of them. I keep my rooms above the bakery. They are mine, and the lock is mine, and no one buys them out from under me. Not to keep me safe. Not for any reason. Ever." She held his eyes. "I keep the radio. I keep the service. The money stays where I put it, with the children. You do not fix my life. You do not guard it unless I ask. And I will ask, when I need it. Because I am not a fool, and I know what your enemies are. But you wait to be asked. You have gotten rather good at waiting." "Yes," he said. And you never again decide a single thing about me that I have not agreed to. Not one. Not to save my life. If there is danger, you tell me, and we choose together. The way you once let me define the thing you were most afraid of. Because if you decide it alone, it means nothing. Her voice caught. I loved a voice that never asked me to be smaller. I need to know the man is the same as the voice. That is my term. All the rest is furniture. Corvin Vale stood at the threshold of a child's room with the lullaby playing, and the woman he had wronged and loved and nearly cost himself forever sitting on the floor in the light, with her face bare and unhidden, and he said, I have spent 5 months becoming a man who could agree to that and mean it. I did not do it to earn you back. I did not let myself believe I would ever be in this room again. I did it because you were right, and because the boy was watching, and because I would rather be the man you described than have anything I could take by being the man I was. He stopped. His voice, when it came again, was very low. May I come in? The question traveled the whole distance of everything between them. The doorway of the great hall on the first day, where he had told her to step away. The suite he had filled without asking. The 5 months of silence he had held like a stone. The threshold where he stood now, powerful enough to own the house around them and careful enough not to cross one line of its floor uninvited. Verena looked at the boy in her arms, and the box playing its found song, and the man waiting in the door. Yes, she said. You can come in. He wiped his shoes on the mat, though the day was dry, out of a habit he had taught himself in a cold cottage of a room he had bought and never had the right to. And he came in, and he sat down on the floor across from her, lower than the boy. At a distance the child could close, or not, and he waited there with his hands open and empty. And after a moment Wren reached out and took one of them, and then reached out and took one of hers, and closed the circle himself. They did not speak for a while. The music box played itself down toward silence, and the boy wound it again, gently now, unafraid, and it played on. I love you, Corvin said finally into the quiet. I loved your voice before I knew your face. And I loved your face before I knew what I had done to it. And I have loved you through 5 months of a silence I had earned, and none of it asks anything of you. I only wanted it said in the daylight for once, by a man you can see. Verena Locke, who had learned from a fire and a marriage, and a boy who would not speak that the loudest scars are the ones no one can see, looked at the man across the small warm circle of the floor, and felt, for the first time in 4 years, no urge whatsoever to turn her face away from the light. Say it once more, she said, in your own voice. Not the dark one, this one. And he did. And it was the same voice. And that was the whole of what she had needed to know. Outside, the first snow of the year began to fall past the tall windows, and inside the safest house in the city, in a room that had learned to hold sound again, a scarred woman and a feared man and a boy who had found his words sat together on the floor, while a small painted box played a dead woman's lullaby into the warm and living dark. And no one in that circle was hidden from anyone anymore, and no one wanted to be.